People often say, very confidently, the universe began with the Big Bang. They say it the way they say, the sun rises in the east, or water boils when it gets hot. It sounds settled, finished, case closed. And that's exactly why we should slow down. Because in science and in life, whenever something sounds too clean, too final, it's usually hiding a misunderstanding. Most people imagine the Big Bang like this. There was nothing. Then suddenly, boom, everything appeared. Space, time, stars, planets, people, cats, all of it. It's a powerful image. It feels dramatic. It feels like a proper beginning. But it's also not what science actually says. The Big Bang is not a story about creation. It's a story about how things were behaving when the universe was very young. That difference is small in words and enormous in meaning. The Big Bang is not a moment where the universe popped into existence like a firework. It's the earliest chapter we can currently read, not the first page of the book. And mistaking one for the other is where the confusion begins. Human beings are obsessed with beginnings. We celebrate birthdays every year, even though nothing magical actually happens on that day. The earth doesn't pause. The universe doesn't reset. But we mark it anyway because it gives us a clean starting point. This is when it all began, we say. We do the same thing with stories. Every book has a first page. Every movie has an opening scene. Even jokes have a setup before the punchline. We feel uncomfortable jumping in halfway. We want to know how it started, who came first, what caused what. That habit is so deep that we hardly notice it. So, when we turn our attention to the universe, we automatically ask the same kind of question. Where did it all begin? And that feels reasonable. After all, everything we experience seems to have a beginning. You were born. Your house was built. This video started a few minutes ago. But here's the catch. Those beginnings are not absolute. They're personal. They depend on where you enter the story. Ask what happened before you were born, and the world doesn't disappear. Life was already in motion. You just weren't part of it yet. The universe may be like that. Our brains evolved to deal with everyday events, eating, walking, remembering, planning. In that world, beginnings are useful. They help us organize memory. They help us explain cause and effect. They help us feel oriented. A starting line makes things feel manageable. But the universe is not an everyday event. It doesn't have to fit neatly into the way our minds prefer to think. And that's where trouble starts. When we hear about the Big Bang, our brain grabs the nearest familiar idea, a first moment, and says, "Ah, that must be the beginning of everything." But that leap comes from psychology, not science. It's the same reason people feel uneasy with open-ended questions. We want closure. We want a final answer. We want a clean explanation that doesn't trail off into uncertainty. Beginnings give us emotional comfort. They let us say, this is where it starts, and stop thinking further. But science works in the opposite direction. Science is comfortable with partial answers. It's comfortable with saying, this is where our description starts working, without claiming that reality itself started there. Here's the important realization. Our craving for a beginning does not mean the universe owes us one. The Big Bang feels like a starting line because our brains are trained to look for starting lines. But the universe doesn't care how stories usually begin. And once you see that, you can separate a very human habit from a very deep question. And that separation is the first step toward real understanding. When scientists say Big Bang, they are not talking about the moment the universe was created. That sentence alone surprises people, because the words big and bang sound like an event, a beginning, a loud starting gun for existence itself. But in science, the Big Bang is not a moment when something appeared out of nothing. It's a description of how the universe was behaving a very long time ago. Think of it this way. Imagine you walk into a movie theater halfway through a film. You see characters running, buildings shaking, music playing loudly. From what you're watching, you can tell something intense happened earlier. There must have been a build-up, a starting scene, maybe an explosion, maybe an argument, maybe something dramatic. But here's the key point. The movie did not begin when you sat down. Your experience has a beginning. The story does not. That's exactly how the Big Bang works. Scientists look at the universe today. Galaxies moving apart, light stretched thin, everything cooling down, and they run the story backward. When they do that, they find the universe used to be much hotter, denser, and more crowded than it is now. That early, hot, crowded phase is what we call the Big Bang. It's not the first page of the book. It's the earliest chapter we can currently read. The Big Bang Theory does not say, this is where everything came from. It says, this is what the universe was like when it was very young. That difference matters more than it sounds. Calling it a creation moment sneaks in ideas that don't belong there. Ideas about nothing suddenly turning into something, about existence starting from scratch. Science doesn't say that. Science says, at some point in the past, the universe was in a state so hot and dense that our current descriptions work very well. As we look further back, those descriptions become less reliable. So the Big Bang is not a birth certificate. It's more like a childhood photograph. It tells you what the universe looked like at an early age, not how reality itself came into being. And when people ask, what happened before the Big Bang? Science doesn't reply, nothing. Science replies, we don't know, because this is where our movie reel runs out. That's not a failure. It's honesty. The Big Bang marks the limit of our current understanding, not the edge of existence. And once you see that, the question changes. Instead of asking, how did everything begin? You start asking something much better. How far can our explanations go? And what will it take to push them further? That's where real curiosity begins. There's a moment in every good journey when the road ends. You're driving along, the signs are clear, the pavement is smooth, and then suddenly the asphalt stops. Beyond it there's dirt, fog, or maybe open water. And right there, a sensible person doesn't keep driving and pretend the road continues. They stop, they take note, they say, okay, this is as far as this road goes. Science has moments like that too. When scientists say, we don't know, they are not saying the universe stops there. They are saying our current tools stop there. That difference is crucial. The edge of knowledge is not an answer. It's a boundary marker. A long time ago, maps of the world ended at the ocean. Not because the earth ended there, but because sailors hadn't gone any farther. The blank space wasn't a statement about reality. It was a statement about experience. The Big Bang is like the edge of one of those old maps. Our theories let us travel very far back in the story of the universe, amazingly far. We can talk about how things were billions of years ago with confidence. But as we push closer to the Big Bang, the signs get blurry, the road narrows. Eventually, the pavement ends. And right there, science does something brave. It stops. It doesn't fill the blank space with guesses. It doesn't draw monsters in the ocean and pretend they're real. It leaves the space blank and writes, in effect, unknown. That blank space makes people uncomfortable. We don't like unanswered questions. We want a firm story. We want a neat ending, or in this case, a neat beginning. So we're tempted to treat the edge of the map as the edge of reality. But that's a mistake. Not knowing what came before the Big Bang does not mean nothing came before. It means our current understanding cannot describe it yet, or maybe not at all in the way we expect. Science is careful about this. It doesn't confuse silence with certainty. When science says, we don't know, it's not shrugging. It's being precise. It's saying, here is where our explanations stop making reliable sense. That honesty is one of science's greatest strengths. because pretending to know something you don't doesn't move you forward. It freezes you in place. The edge of knowledge is not a dead end. It's a signpost. It tells future explorers where new ideas are needed, where assumptions must be questioned, where better tools might open new roads. Here's the realization to take with you. Ignorance, clearly marked, is not failure, it's progress. The Big Bang is not the place where answers end. It's the place where better questions begin. When people ask about the Big Bang, they almost always ask the same follow-up question. What happened before it? That question feels completely natural. So natural, in fact, that it doesn't even feel like a question. It feels like common sense. But that's exactly why we should slow down. The word before carries a lot of hidden baggage. It assumes that time is already there, stretched out like a long road, and events are just sitting along it, waiting to be placed. First this happened, then that happened, and before that something else must have happened too. That way of thinking works beautifully for everyday life. But the universe is not everyday life. When you ask, what happened before you were born? The question makes sense, because time didn't begin when you did. The world was already running. You simply weren't part of the story yet. So your birth feels like a beginning, but it isn't an absolute one. It's a personal starting point. Now here's the tricky part. When we ask, what happened before the Big Bang, we may be accidentally treating the universe like a person, assuming it stepped onto a stage where time was already waiting. But time itself may be part of the universe's story, not the stage it's acting on. If that's true, then asking before the Big Bang may be like asking, what happened before the first page of the book existed? The question uses words that assume the very thing you're trying to explain. This doesn't mean the question is foolish. It means it might be poorly formed. Language evolved to help us talk about fruit, weather, danger, and dinner plans, not the deepest structure of reality. So when we stretch everyday words like before, after, and beginning to cosmic scales, they can snap. That snapping feels like confusion. We ask a question, and instead of getting a clear answer, we get discomfort. And our instinct is to push harder, to demand clarity. But sometimes clarity doesn't come from forcing an answer. It comes from noticing that the question itself may need rethinking. Here's the important realization. Not every meaningful question can be asked using everyday language. The Big Bang might not be a beginning in the way birthdays are beginnings. It might be more like a boundary, a place where our familiar way of talking about time stops working. That doesn't mean there was nothing. It doesn't mean there was something. It means we don't yet know how to ask the right question without breaking the words we're using. And recognizing that, recognizing when language itself starts to wobble, is not the end of understanding. It's often the very beginning of it. Science works by telling stories. Not fairy tales, useful stories. Stories that help us predict what will happen if we do this or that. Stories that organize what we observe into something we can understand and use. But here's the rule that saves us from a lot of trouble. A story that works is not the same thing as the truth. When scientists write equations or build models, they are not claiming this is what reality really is. They are saying this way of thinking matches what we see so far. That's a big difference. A map can be incredibly useful. It can tell you where to turn, how far to travel, and how to avoid getting lost. But if you confuse the map with the place itself, you'll end up very confused when the road curves and the map doesn't. The Big Bang is a map. It's a very good map for a large stretch of the universe's history. It tells us how things cool, spread out, and change over time. It helps us make sense of what we observe in the sky. But it was never meant to be the final word on existence. The danger comes when usefulness quietly turns into certainty. We say, this model works beautifully, and without noticing, we start saying, this is how reality really is. That jump feels small, but it's enormous. History is full of examples where models worked extremely well until they didn't. People once had excellent models of motion that ignored tiny effects, excellent models of heat that ignored atoms, excellent models of light that ignored waves or particles. Those models weren't stupid. They were stepping stones. The mistake wasn't using them. The mistake would have been treating them as final. Science doesn't advance by declaring victory. It advances by staying flexible, by always leaving room for improvement. Here's the realization to keep in mind. Usefulness does not equal completeness. A model can explain a great deal and still leave the deepest questions untouched. The Big Bang model explains how the universe behaves after a certain point. It does not explain why there is a universe at all, or what, if anything, lies beyond the reach of that description. And that's not a flaw. It's a reminder of what science is actually good at, explaining patterns, not pronouncing ultimate truths. The moment we stop confusing this works with this is everything, science stays honest and curiosity stays alive. One of the most important lessons Richard Feynman tried to pass on had nothing to do with equations, particles, or stars. It was about attitude. Feynman was deeply comfortable with uncertainty, not because he didn't care about answers, but because he cared more about honesty than comfort. Most people want certainty. It feels safe. It feels like solid ground. When someone says, "This is how it is," no question, there's a sense of relief. You can stop thinking. Feynman didn't trust that feeling. He believed that the moment something feels too certain, it's time to look closer. Not because it's wrong, but because confidence can quietly replace understanding. Doubt, in his way of thinking, wasn't weakness. It was a tool. If you're willing to say, "I don't know," you stay curious. You keep asking better questions. You stay alert to mistakes, including your own. That attitude matters enormously when we talk about the beginning of the universe. Because anyone who tells you they fully understand how everything began is almost certainly mistaken. The problem is simply too big, too deep, and too far beyond our everyday experience. Mystery, in this sense, is not failure. It's information. It tells you where the limits of your current ideas are. It shows you where your assumptions stop working, and that's exactly where science makes progress. Feynman often warned against the temptation to replace ignorance with impressive-sounding words. Just because something has a name doesn't mean it's understood. Just because a story sounds scientific doesn't mean it's complete. He preferred an honest "I don't know" to a confident answer built on shaky ground. There's a quiet courage in that. It takes confidence to admit uncertainty, real confidence, not the fragile kind that needs to be protected by certainty. And it leads to a healthier relationship with questions like the Big Bang. Instead of demanding final answers, you learn to appreciate partial ones. Instead of treating mystery as a gap to be filled immediately, you treat it as a space to explore. Here's the realization to sit with. Not knowing is not the opposite of understanding. Pretending to know is. The universe doesn't owe us clarity on our schedule. It reveals itself slowly, through careful questioning and patient doubt. Feynman's way of thinking wasn't about having the last word. It was about staying curious long enough to hear the next one. And when it comes to the deepest questions of all, where everything came from, why there is something rather than nothing, that attitude isn't just helpful. It's essential. The Big Bang was not the beginning of everything. It was the beginning of what we can currently describe. And that's okay. The universe doesn't owe us simple answers. It doesn't owe us neat beginnings or clean endings. What it offers instead is something better, mystery that can be explored piece by piece. Science is not about closing the book. It's about learning how to read the next page without pretending we've reached the last one. And if you walk away from this with fewer answers but better questions, that's not a failure. That's exactly how understanding grows.